My name is Josh Brown. I'm with a company called Irrigation-Mart. We're based out of north central Louisiana. We are a full line irrigation dealer, which means that we stock just about every brand, and we can basically provide all the components to complete an irrigation system. And we deal from backyard gardeners all the way up to your guys that are 1,500 acres of vegetables across the southeast. Today, we're primarily talking about backyard gardens. We've got two main types of irrigation I want to talk to you today about. One is drip irrigation, and the other is sprinkler or spray irrigation. And so starting out with the drip, we have a couple different types that we typically look at. We have a temporary, which is what this is, and we have a permanent style. And so in a temporary, we typically think about crops that have to be planted every year, like tomatoes, okra, corn, things that we're going to take up, possibly till the soil and redo. And so in using that, we go with and this is called drip tape. And they call it a tape because it is a thin wall polyethylene product. Unlike soaker hose, which most of you are familiar with, it's just a porous hose, this actually has a discrete emitter built into it. This particular type emits 0.24 gallons per hour at 10 psi. And so on this particular one has a emitter every 12 inches. This is commonly used in most of your vegetables like tomatoes, squash, okra, corn. Creates a nice wetted pattern down the row. On these comes in a 1,000-foot roll for the smallest rolls that we carry. The bigger rolls get into 6,000, 7,500, or 9,000-foot rolls, much bigger. But it allows you to roll it off at the end of the season. You can choose to reuse it, or you can take it up and throw it away or recycle it. It is a plastic, so you can recycle that. They actually take this up in the vegetable fields, have it available on those, so they take it up and recycle that and use it for trash bags and other things like that instead of just simply disposing of it. And so it is possible to reuse that. I'm going to pass this around so that you can see on that. The way the drip tape is supplied is we're using a thicker polyethylene header line. The header line is a permanent product, so it's made to reuse year after year. What we use with this kit comes with what we call a blank poly, which means it does not have any holes in it. And so for all of your fittings, you're going to actually punch the hole in. And so for this particular one, everything comes made to connect to a water faucet for water faucet threads. And so you're going to be able to get the components. Most of those, whether it's Irrigation-Mart or another company, they're going to have a kit. They're going to have all the components in a bag sealed, and inside the bag there's going to be directions. I encourage you, no matter who you order from, consider the kit, because instead of trying to go through the website or trying to ensure you get compatible parts, it's already done for you in an economical way. You can add to the kit if you need a few more fittings, but it's the easiest way to get the components and know that they work and have directions that go with it. But with this one, it's going to start with a filter on it, and with any of the irrigation, filtration is key, because when we're talking about micro irrigation, we're talking about very small hole sizes that the water comes out, which means they can be clogged easily. So we have to have clean water. And so this particular one will just simply be a screen filter, nothing fancy. Typically on that, you'll need to clean that occasionally, but most of your municipal waters, you'll have a little bit of sand that comes in there, but most of the time we're not talking about a lot of the different trash that gets in there. It's usually pretty clean. After that, we're going to use a pressure regulator. It's key because this is a low pressure system and operates typically between 8 to 15 psi. So we're operating at a low pressure. Your municipal systems typically are going to be between 40 and 70 pounds of pressure depending on where you're located. So it's crucial that you have that. If you were to hook this up without, it would blow spots open in the tape, over pressurizing. The poly that's used can handle higher pressures. It's simply the drip tape that's a thinner wall to save on price, money, and product that cannot handle those pressures. In order to install these, you're going to use a hole punch. Very simple. If we were to put those fittings in, we're simply they have a barbed connection on them. We'd simply take a punch, and you just punch a hole in it, and then you're going to take and push it in. That barbed connection fits right in. It has a nut for the tape. Unlike every other application with the nut, you do not take this nut off to put it on. You tighten it all the way down, slide the tape over it, and then try to take the nut off. In doing so, it tightens down against the back side of the barb. So it's different than any other one that you've seen. On these, each row comes with a valve that you can turn on or off. Since most of our gardens, we have mixed plantings, they do not need irrigating the same. So your okra, you're not going to water nearly as much as you do your tomato and corn. If you do, your okra is not going to do very well. I typically encourage that you get the kit with a row valve. That way, if you want to turn one off, you can. And using these, it'll come with a 100-foot roll. This is a 1,000-foot garden kit, but it'll come with a 100-foot roll of poly. So typically that's enough to connect to the water faucet, run out, connect your rows. Since they're punched in, you can, varied row spacings, any of that, it's easily adaptable to whatever you want it to do. With this as well, there's fittings. The kit will come with a T, some repair coupling, and it'll also come with some other fittings, but some goof plugs. If you poke a hole and decide you don't want a row, you can plug it. You still can plug the holes, but you can always order additional fittings. And this is what I call for a temporary crop that you're going to redo every year. If you're looking at permanent crops where you're going to have, say, containers, long containers where you want to have tubing that stays in there to cut length, we're going to look more at a permanent system. And in doing so, that might be containers to where we're doing a spaghetti tubing like this and putting in the containers to direct the flow of water in it. Or it might be drip emitters in a poly that are just punched in. These particular emitters are 1 gallon per hour emitters. They're pressure compensating, and since this is not thin wall tape, this particular product, you can operate it at a wider range of pressure. Generally on it, about 18 to 40 pounds of pressure is an acceptable pressure on the drip emitters. Typically we put a 25-pound pressure regulator because there's no point in putting more pressure on the system than need be, because then you'll have more leaks, blowouts, things like that. It's just more prone to it. But very simple, it's the same punch that you use on the other. You're going to punch a hole, it's barbed. They pop right in, and again emit 1 gallon per hour. For potted plants, there's a few different options, but one is like this. You can get a splitter, and it's a simply press fit. It presses on, and then it has a stake. This particular stake is just simply to hold the tube in place and direct the flow of water. So as this drips 1 gallon per hour, you're going to get half a gallon here, half a gallon to this pot. So if you have a row of pots, a lot of times what's done is this tubing will be run down the center between the pots, and then the splitter's put on and you put a stake on each pot. As you go down, then you put them. These can also be gotten in 4-way splitters as well, or single outlet splitters, or single outlets on them. So there's a lot of options there. But again, this is typically made for more permanent style, to where you're gonna, like a container or something, you may replant it, but it's set and cut for that specific size. It's not in a big area and you want to reuse it year after year. Again, similar to the other, it comes in a kit that's available. Everything will come in a bag with directions. If you get into an application to where a kit is not your best option, no matter who you call, I encourage you before purchasing to talk to someone. If you're not certain, tell them your situation, and then they can advise you better if a kit's what you need, or if you need something that's more customized for it, and they can do that. And so doing this, it still connects the same way. You're going to have a filter with it on it, a pressure regulator. The difference is the pressure regulator for this will be a 25 psi typically for it. And so that's, for backyard gardens, that's the main types of drip irrigation that we use. When we start looking at spray irrigating or micro sprinklers or jets, we have a few different options. So if you're doing a small orchard on it, and you have, say, 10 pear trees or apple trees that you're doing, or maybe you have some peach trees, and you want to do sprinklers on that, because they typically are going to have a shallower root zone, and so we need to cover a wider area, we can take these, put the stake right off of the tree. In those cases, we'll still use a poly tubing like this to run down the row, and then we'll simply punch in and place this in. This particular one is a 10.5 gallon per hour nozzle. These are interchangeable, so they come in all different varieties. This particular one is a jet, and it's called a jet because there's no moving parts. It's simply a hole through it, and that size hole is what determines the flow rate, and then it has a molded pattern on top, a deflector pattern. That's what determines the trajectory and the pattern of the spray. It's very simple, inexpensive. These are cents to buy. You're talking probably 35, 36 cents for that, and that's it, so it's very inexpensive. and you can put that on each stake, and again works with the same hole punch, and you can punch that in the poly tubing to irrigate your orchard. We also have for potted stuff, if you end up with like blueberries and bigger pots and you're using a bark media or some other porous media application, to where using this style of dripper simply directs the drops of water to go in the pot. We also have spray stakes that look almost identical to this, but they're spray stakes, and so it applies water to a pattern just like these, except the pattern is on a flat base and it deflects the water into the pot. The purpose of that is, in that porous material, is to not allow that water to just channel down and miss most of the root zone. And in doing that, most of the time those may be a 180-degree pattern or 90-degree pattern. They're typically placed in the corner of the pot and they spray down and outward to cover inside of the pot. So it gives you a few more applications or solutions to applications that you may have to do that. But again, those work great for porous materials in pots if you're using that to do with it. And whenever you're doing your irrigation, if you're like me, I often remember to turn it on. I don't remember to turn it off until the next morning when I go out. So I highly recommend that you get a timer. This brand is Orbit. You can find these at Lowe's, Home Depot, or most all of the irrigation companies will have these. This particular style is fairly inexpensive and it's simple. If you don't like tech, this is the one. It's just like the old kitchen timers where you wind it up. You can set it to up to 120 minutes and it will simply count down and shut off. So that way you simply go cut it on, cut it off. I travel a lot, so that's not sufficient for me. I need one that turns on and off for me. So I like the digital ones, and I can program it what days I want it to come on and for how long. And so it comes on and off automatically. You simply leave your water faucet on. These tie directly in line with the other water faucet connections, so it makes everything very simple and compatible to attach to it. So you would just put it before the whole configuration and attach it. The only downside is, and you have to watch this, you end up with a very long section coming off. So every now and then you have to get creative and come down with some poly before you put your timer or something. You may want to get creative because it does get a little bit long when you do that. And that is basically, in a nutshell, when you're looking at backyard gardens, that is most of the components that we use. We'll be happy to help recommend anything that you might need, or answer any questions that you have.